Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sports Lock Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Mostaller, and tonight we have the 2023 NFC South Divisional Preview. We got the Falcons, we have the Panthers, we have the Saints, and we got the Buccaneers. We're going to break down every team. I'll let you know fantasy-wise who I'm picking, who I'm staying away from, where I'm ranking these guys, and at the end, I'll give you the rankings. If you haven't checked out my past videos, we've completed the whole AFC. We did the NFC North last week. Now we're on the South. Next 2 weeks, we'll cover the East and the West. And finally, to end it off before the season starts, I will give you my ranking sleepers and busts. So that's a podcast you won't want to miss, coming right out the week prior to the end of preseason and of Labor Day there. So preseason starting this week. So it's very exciting there. And we get football back, which is great. So let's jump right into the NFC South. We're going to start with the Atlanta Falcons here, who finished last in the division at 7-10, although there was a tie between three of those teams at 7-10. This was their first season last year without Matt Ryan since 2007. So they'll be going in to their second season without their old veteran, Matt Ryan. So what did they do in the draft in the offseason? Well, they signed quarterback Taylor Heineke from the Washington Commanders to a 2-year deal. They also signed defensive end Bud Dupree to a 1-year deal. And they went out and got wide receiver Mac Hollins from the Raiders, who was their third guy in the rotation there in Vegas. The big news, though, was going out and drafting with the 8th overall pick, running back Bijan Robinson from Texas, who in his last 2 seasons had a total of over 2,700 rushing yards and over 30 or right around 35 total touchdowns at 35 there. We will talk about him more in a minute and see what kind of fantasy impact he will have. But let's talk about the second-year guy, Desmond Ridder, who played behind Marcus Mariota last year, although he did start 4 games. And in those 4 games, he had a total of 708 yards and 2 touchdowns. If he was healthy, he would have finished as a QB 12. Now that's saying that's what he was on pace for, was QB 12. I don't think he would have been the QB 12, but he was on pace for that. This year, he isn't a lock to be the starter. They go out and get Taylor Heineke, who had some major starting time in Washington. So I think it'll be a battle in preseason a little bit. And if it is Ridder, he's not going to be drafted. People aren't going to go out and draft him unless they're Falcons fans. But for me, he's my QB 29, ESPN QB 31. I do think he has some upside if he does start, but I'm not drafting him. I'm going to wait for him on waivers and see if he goes off. But I wouldn't be shocked if he does make a little bit of a run. Again, on pace for QB 12 last year, that's if everything would have went perfect, and I just don't see that happening in Atlanta. The running back is Bijan Robinson, and he was just phenomenal in college, and he has huge upside this year. He's being drafted as the 3rd overall running back, which I think is insane. Even when a guy like Saquon Barkley was a rookie taken, 2nd overall? Saquon, I don't even think was taken 3rd overall. So to say Bijan Robinson should be taken 3rd overall, I think's a little bit too high. I'm not saying he can't. He has a high ceiling, but we also don't know what his floor is. And because of that, you have to take caution with him. Comfortably, I think my floor, I would say RB8, but ESPN has him at RB3. So take it as you want. I'm just not comfortable taking a rookie running back, although they've performed well. Guys that have been taken in the first round that have started in fantasy, they've done well. The rookies have done well. Saquon Barkley is a name that you can picture that guys took risks on. But for me, I think it's just a little too risky for Bijan, especially on that Atlanta Falcons offense. I'm taking him more as my RB8. Wide receivers, Drake London, that we're going to focus in on. He had a solid rookie season, 72 receptions, 866 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He was a wide receiver 31. We talk a little bit about Mac Hollins. He finished as a wide receiver 46 in Vegas as the 3rd guy, 57 receptions, 690 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So what do I think they'll do this year? I think London should see a slight uptick in yards and touchdowns. Now that you have that connection with Ridder, I think that he can pop off. He's my wide receiver 27, ESPN wide receiver 31. Mac Hollins is a very big sleeper here. Wide receiver 93, they're saying on ESPN. I think he'll be more like 76. Again, not a guy you're going to go out and draft, but if he is the wide receiver 2 in Atlanta, he could put up numbers somewhere around wide receiver 50, in my opinion. Now, the tight end Kyle Pitts, he's been a bust since starting in the NFL. He's a guy that was the highest drafted tight end in NFL history in the draft. And the last 2 seasons have just been terrible. He's only been able to rack up 3 touchdowns in 3 seasons, which is not good at all for Pitts. Now, I think Pitts improves this year. He's got to have one good season. And I think this year he can get there. He's my tight end 5, ESPN tight end 6. He's got the talent. It just sucks with injuries and his usage that he's been a pretty poor tight end. Now, I'm not going to be excited to get Kyle Pitts, but, if he's there around tight end 6, 7, Pat Fryermuth area, I'm going to rather take Kyle Pitts for that upside. He's just a very talented guy. So for me, tight end 5, when you take a look at all the tight ends, ESPN tight end 6. Now, the defense was terrible. They're not a defense you're going to want to draft. The pros are that a lot of second to third year players that are on this team, they should improve. Pitts, Desmond Ridder going into his second year. We hope that that'll happen. But a con is that they got a terrible defense. So last year they went 7-10. I projected 4-13, which was way worse. This year, give me 7-10 again. I don't think they get any worse, but I don't think they get much better. Now let's move on to the Carolina Panthers, who finished second in the division at 7-10. This was the Panthers' best season since 2018. Again, a tie there with the Falcons. Now let's take a look at their draft and offseason moves. They go out and grab tight end Hayden Hurst, sign him to a 3-year deal. He was with the Bengals last year. They then signed DJ Chark from Detroit. They also grabbed Miles Sanders, which was a huge pickup there, especially with McCaffrey getting traded last season. And then Adam Thielen, the well-known wide receiver from the Minnesota Vikings. They also had the first overall pick in the draft, and they take quarterback Bryce Young, which was a phenomenal pick for them. At his 2 seasons as a starter at Alabama, 8,200 yards, 79 touchdowns, and only 12 interceptions. Phenomenal. They also then go in the second round with the 8th overall pick there and grab wide receiver Jonathan Mingo out of Ole Miss. And he had 51 receptions, 861 yards, and 5 touchdowns, and that was last season, which isn't phenomenal, but it also adds some size, adds some depth to this wide receiver core, which they really don't have. So I'm not mad about that. I think it's a pretty good pickup there for them in the second round. Let's talk about Bryce Young a little bit more. He was a 2021 Heisman winner and is looking to do big things as a first overall pick. What is he going to do as his first season? I always love to watch the preseason for these guys. How will he perform? I know it's the preseason, but how's he performing? And that's what I'm going to be looking at. I think he's more of a sleeper than a bust to me. I mean, if he puts up Alabama numbers, he could easily be a top 10 quarterback in fantasy. I'm not taking him there, but I do think that he's a sleeper this year. I have him as my QB 21, ESPN QB 25. I do think based off preseason play, that number could go up. I'm looking for it to go up on ESPN, and it could even move up in my ranking. So Bryce Young is a guy I'm closely monitoring, and by the time I do my rankings and busts, that's why I wait until as late as possible to do it. We'll see where I truly feel like he will go. Now, Miles Sanders finished as RB14 last year in Philly, 1,269 yards, which was 5th best amongst running backs, and 11 touchdowns, which was 4th best. Now, Sanders is not going to be used much in the passing game, so it hurts him more in PPR leagues than it does non-PPR leagues, but he's taking over in a backfield that Christian McCaffrey has had for years now. And this is a big name guy in Miles Sanders. He did well in Philly, especially last season. So now he's going to be the bell cow. I mean, you have Chuba Hubbard there right behind him, but Sanders, they got him for a reason. And I think they're going to use him, especially with a rookie quarterback in Bryce Young. They're going to use him as a bell cow, more than they did in Philadelphia, I think. So he's my RB16, ESPN RB20, but I do think he could finish closer to RB10 this year. He has that upside. We've seen the running back succeed, even with Dante Foreman last year when McCaffrey was traded. I think there's a lot of upside from Miles Sanders, and you can get him in the third, fourth round. And if you decide to draft two wide receivers right off the bat, Sanders isn't a bad pickup to be your RB1. I think he's a solid RB1. So I'm really excited about Miles Sanders this year. Same kind of goes with Adam Thielen leading the pack there for the Panthers. He was a solid wide receiver, 9 years with the Vikings, and obviously should be the wide receiver one, in my opinion, although ESPN saying Chark is. He's listed as the wide receiver one on the depth chart, though. Thielen was a wide receiver 30 last year, 70 receptions, 716 yards, and 6 touchdowns. I know that's with Kirk Cousins. He gets a little downgrade at quarterback, or does he? DJ Chark they also added, and he finished wide receiver 73 last year. So I believe Thielen should have similar numbers, maybe a touchdown less, but otherwise I think he gets close to the 70 receptions, maybe a little bit more receiving yards. ESPN's very low on him. Wide receiver 53. He's my wide receiver 41. And again, he was the wide receiver 2 on his team the last few seasons, and he still finished wide receiver 30 last year. So if he takes over as a wide receiver 1, why doesn't he finish, somewhere around wide receiver 25 to 30? I don't see why he doesn't. So conservatively, I'm putting him as my wide receiver 41, not even close to where ESPN has him at wide receiver 53. And DJ Chark, I'm going to put a little bit below him because ESPN has Chark at 48. I'm going to agree with the 48, but I'm moving Thielen ahead. Tight end's Hayden Hurst. He was the tight end 21 in Cincinnati last year. That was a much better offense this year with a less productive offense. He's my tight end 26, and that's where ESPN has him as well. So not a exciting tight end even as a backup. Now the defense was average. The pros are that there's a lot of exciting new pieces to the team. They drafted Bryce Young. You added Miles Sanders, Adam Thielen, DJ Chark. Their whole offense is brand new. So that's exciting. That's a pro that it's probably going to be better than what they've had in years past. But a lot of the cons is that it is a lot of new pieces to the offense. They still have to perform as a team. We're not used to any of these guys working together. So that could be a huge con. So last year, 7-10, I projected 4-13. This year, I'm going 6-11. I think they go one worse. Again, I'm going conservative, but they could shock some people. Now let's move on to the New Orleans Saints, who finished third in the division at 7-10. We have that 3-way tie last year between the Saints, the Panthers, and the Falcons. That was their worst finish and record since 2016. Now, in their offseason, they made some big moves as well. They went out and signed Derek Carr from the Raiders to a 4-year deal. They also grabbed his tight end, Foster Moreau, to a 3-year deal. They just recently signed, as of the other day, Kareem Hunt from the Browns. They also got linebacker Anthony Barr from Dallas, who I think is a big addition to that defense. In the draft, they went defensive tackle in the first round with the 30th overall pick, Brian Breesy out of Clemson. And then in the third round with the 8th overall pick, they went with Kendry Miller out of TCU. So let's talk about Derek Carr. He finished as a QB 16 last year in Vegas with over 35, that'd be terrible. 3,500 passing yards, 24 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions, which was tied for second worst amongst starting quarterbacks. So what is he going to do this year on a new team? Well, he's going to have 2 solid wide receivers. He goes from Adams and Renfro to Olave and Thomas. But how much better is that going to be? Is that going to improve him a lot more? Obviously, Adams is the most talented guy that he's thrown to, but Thomas can be as well. And Olave had a great season last year. So I don't really see a huge change in his numbers with a lot of other quarterbacks stepping forward. He's going to be my QB 20. I don't really see too much more of a ceiling for him there. Maybe QB 15, 14. But ESPN has him as their QB 22. So I'm playing it safe on Derek Carr. Not a guy I really want to take a risk on, even as a backup. I'd rather take guys that have a higher upside, like Bryce Young, and just let him sit on the waivers. Running backs Alvin Kamara, who finished as the RB15 last year, only 4 total touchdowns, but had the 6th most receptions for a running back. Now we know that he's going to be suspended for 3 games due to an off the field altercation that he got into in Las Vegas. I'm not going to really get into that, but either Jamal Williams or Kareem Hunt will start those games. So what's my predictions? I think the backfield is just way too crowded. You have Alvin Kamara. You have Jamal Williams, who went off for 17 touchdowns last year. You had Kareem Hunt, who was a solid backup in Cleveland. And they just drafted that Miller from TCU in the draft in the 3rd round. So for me, Williams, although he had 17 touchdowns, I don't think he gets close to that here this year. He was the RB12, but I don't think he gets there. I would just kind of stay away from all of them at their ADP. I think there's better options around those guys that'll be a guaranteed safer floor for you. But Kamara, if he plays, if he's healthy, he's one of the best running backs in the league. I have him as my RB21. ESPN has him RB19, so just a couple spots ahead. I think the 3 games doesn't necessarily hurt him, but it doesn't help. Williams, RB39. ESPN has him as RB36. So I'm a little bit more conservative on the Saints running backs. Now, how about the Saints wide receivers? We have Chris Olave going into his 2nd season and Michael Thomas. Olave had a great rookie season. He was the wide receiver 25 with 72 receptions, over 1,000 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Michael Thomas, he's been a disappointment the last 3 seasons, only playing in 10 games since. But last year, 3 games, 3 touchdowns. So there's a lot of hope for Michael Thomas this season. Both wide receivers, I think, will have great seasons with Carr. They definitely get a quarterback upgrade in Carr from what they had last year. Olave, in my opinion, is a safer play. He's played more games than Thomas has in the last 3 seasons. That was in 1 season in his rookie year. Olave is my wide receiver 15. I think he can finish as a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy. That's where ESPN has him. And then Michael Thomas, I'm a little bit higher on. The guy's very talented. He was a top wide receiver pick in fantasy football in years past, and he still has it. It's just he's injury prone. So I know you got to be a little bit more conservative on him, but he does have a high ceiling. So conservatively, he's my wide receiver 31, ESPN wide receiver 36. The tight ends, Juwan Johnson. He had a surprisingly decent year last year as a tight end 15, 42 receptions, 508 yards, and 7 touchdowns, which was tied 3rd amongst tight ends. This year, I know Carr likes his tight ends, but I think Johnson's not going to get to the 7 touchdown range. I see him more around a 4 or 5 touchdown guy. So that drops him down for me to tight end 21, ESPN tight end 22, but definitely could be a sleeper there. We expect a little bit of a downgrade, but it's possible that he does improve with Derek Carr. Now the defense, just like the Panthers, is average. The pros are that they're deep at running back and tight end. You talk about Juwan Johnson, you talk about Foster Moreau. It's a poor division that also benefits the Saints. The cons are, though, can Michael Thomas go back to his old ways with the new pieces, and can those new pieces mesh? Again, a new quarterback into the mix. Can they do well together? Last year, 7-10, projected 6-11. I think they flip it around and go 10-7 this year. A very, very bad division, the worst division in the NFL this season. These teams could all go under 500 like they did last year. But I think that the Saints get to the 10-win mark. They get a little bit easier of a schedule since they finished 3rd in the division last year. So I'm pretty confident in the Saints winning this division. Lastly, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who won the division at 8-9 last year. This was their worst season since 2019, pretty much since getting Brady. So what did they do in the offseason? Not too much. They went out and got Baker Mayfield to be their starter from the Rams, and they also got Chase Edmonds from the Miami Dolphins in the draft. Really, in the first round, they didn't have too much with a 19th overall pick. They went with defensive tackle Kalijah Cansey out of Pitt. So let's talk about Baker Mayfield. He started 10 games last season between Carolina and with the Rams and just had over 2,100 passing yards, 10 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He definitely has more talent than he has anywhere else with the wide receiver core of Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. But I think he still struggles. He's still Baker Mayfield for a reason. He's my QB 30, ESPN QB 32. Running back Rachaad White. He played behind Leonard Fournette all last season and only started 8 games. But in those games, he averaged 45 yards per game and 2 receiving touchdowns, which isn't too promising. We see some of these guys when they were not starting, not doing so well. So, I should say when they're starting, they were not doing as well as they were coming off the bench. Now, there's other options in that backfield with like Keyshawn Vaughn and Chase Edmonds, but White will be the starter. ESPN's very high on him. They have him as RB18. I don't see him getting there. He's my RB25. This team's just not going to be great this year. And it sucks for 2 guys like this, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin at the wide receiver position, because last year they finished wide receivers 17 and 18 in fantasy. Godwin racked in 104 receptions, was 6th best amongst wide receivers, compared to Evans' 77, but Evans had 3 more touchdowns and 101 more receiving yards. So we know they're both talented guys, and the question is going to be, who's Mayfield connect with? Who's the guy he is going to want to go to? Because both are very talented. To me, I just have a gut feeling it's going to be Evans, and Evans is my wide receiver 21, ESPN wide receiver 26. Godwin's my wide receiver 25, ESPN wide receiver 20. So I kind of have them flip-flop there. I'm not excited to draft either of these guys with Baker or Mayfield there, but somebody's got to step up. And although Mayfield might not be the best fantasy wide receiver, he's going to get the ball to these guys. So that's where I have them this season. Tight end Cade Otton finished tight end 26 in his rookie season, 42 receptions, 391 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I really don't see much improvement from this year with Mayfield. I'm going to keep him at tight end 27, as does ESPN. Defense, average. What are the pros? They have a solid mix of fresh faces and veterans. I feel like the veterans can hold them up, but they also have some fresh faces that get into the mix. The cons, the team lost Tom Brady and many other key pieces. Last year, 8-9, I projected 14-3. I'm going 3-14. I think it's a bad year for those Tampa Bay Buccaneers and potentially could finish as the worst team in football. So this year new, I've been doing some teams. This isn't saying when I get to sleepers and busts, I think overall they are, just for the division. So the best would be Derek Carr, running back Miles Sanders, wide receiver Chris Olave, and the tight end Kyle Pitts. Sleepers for me, Bryce Young is a huge sleeper, and he might even hit the overall sleeper list this season when we get to it in a couple weeks. Running back Rachaad White is kind of a sleeper for me, even though I don't 100% agree. When you take a look at Sanders, I think he's pretty set. When you take a look at Kamara, I think he's pretty set. So Rachaad White's the guy to go to. Wide receiver Adam Thielen, very, very low on Thielen. ESPN is, I think he does a lot better. And then tight end Juwan Johnson. I know he's being drafted down around tight end 21, 22. However, he did finish as the tight end 15 last year. So he's a sleeper in the division for me. The bust would have to be Desmond Ridder, although I don't mind Ridder, and I think that he could be more of a sleeper. When we take a look at all these quarterbacks, I would say that Ridder would be the guy to bust, potentially because Taylor Heineke could take over some time. Running back Bijan Robinson, to me, is a bust at his ADP. I wouldn't take him RB3. I would take him more closer to the RB10, just because he is a rookie. We don't know what he'll do on that Atlanta Falcons offense. I have Chris Godwin as a bust with Baker Mayfield now instead of Tom Brady. I don't think he will perform as well, but still, wide receiver 25 isn't terrible. And the tight end Cade Otton of Tampa Bay as well. I just don't see with the quarterback downgrade him improving much from where he was last year. Finally, we get to the predictions. The Saints 10-7, the Falcons 7-10, the Panthers 6-11, and the Buccaneers 3-14. That's the podcast for you tonight. Thank you for listening in. Make sure to follow if you enjoy it. share it with your friends. Sports Lock Podcast here on YouTube, also over on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and that'll be it for tonight. Next week, we have the exciting NFC East, followed by the NFC West, and then we will go into the Sleepers, Rankings, and Bust podcast before the season starts, and then we will do weekly predictions and sports bets from there. So thank you guys for listening in. I appreciate the love and support, and I will see you guys next week.